The Pittsburgh Steelers are rumored to be looking to be making the move to trade up in the NFL draft. Is it true? Who could they be looking at? We'll talk about, and what would it cost, of course. We'll talk about all of that on the Locked On Steelers podcast today. I'm Chris Carter, joined by Jenna Harner of Channel 11 WPXI. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button on this video. If you're enjoying it, hit the subscribe button to our YouTube channel to get all of our daily updates Monday through Friday, as well as our breaking news updates whenever they happen. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day. Joining me today, as always, on Fridays, is the amazing Jenna Harner of Channel 11 WPXI. Jenna, what's up?
Chris, how are you? It's so nice to see you on this Friday.
It's sunny. It's nice. I'm wearing t-shirts in my house, not sweaters. I love it. I'm happy.
It is wonderful. Seeing this weather, we needed it. It feels like it was a long time coming. I know there's going to be like a little cold coming, but you know what? As long as there's sunshine, I will take it. I'm here for it.
That cold can't be here for too much longer. If it is, then climate change is doing worse than we thought. But anyways, let's get to today's main topic. And that's, of course, I talked earlier about the rumors of the Steelers trading up. Now, this was something that was tweeted out by Paul Andrew Esden Jr. He's a Jets. He's a radio personality who covers the New York Jets. He does some digital reporting as well. But he tweeted out on Wednesday, that there was a report out that the Saints and the Steelers have both been, quote unquote, laying the groundwork for a draft day trade up. And they said the two teams to watch that would be involved with such a trade would either be the Giants with their 7th overall pick or the Vikings with the 12th overall pick. Now, Giants, of course, 7th overall pick, that would be a prime position to go get a quarterback. And that would be right after the Carolina Panthers, but before the Falcons and the Seahawks, two teams that could possibly be targeting quarterbacks in this draft class. So that's a potential, but that would cost a significantly higher payout to get that pick than it would to get the 12th overall pick. So in looking at this, Jenna, I was talking to our guy, Luke Braun. He hosts Locked On Vikings, and we did some co-working on what it would take for the Steelers to move up to the 12th overall pick where the Vikings are. I sent him a trade offer of basically this year's first round pick at 20th overall, this year's third round pick at 84th overall, and then next year's third round pick to move up to that spot. This was, Jenna, was the response I got from Luke on his show Locked On Vikings.
This feels very on par. On the Rich Hill chart, it just about works out to dead even. It leaves, 20 plus 84 for pick number 12, leaves the Steelers about 25-ish points on that trade chart short, and that's about a 4th round pick. And if you remember, the rule of thumb is a pick next year is worth the same this year, a round deferred. So a 3rd rounder next year is a 4th rounder this year. And so that's about perfect. 3rd rounder next year is exactly the kicker you need to make that work out. So we get an extra 3rd rounder in each of the next 2 years, and we just have to move down 8 spots in the draft.
So there you have it from Luke, a guy who I joke around a lot with Twitter. If you don't see him, so he's a great guy in what he does. But apparently, that offer would work, Jenna, and that kind of cost you keep your 2nd round pick. That does seem more of like the reasonable range that would allow the Steelers to do what they need to do this year without selling the farm next year.
Yeah, and it doesn't feel outrageous to me either. Again, you're switching spots, so it's not like you're giving up a 1st round pick like you did to get Minkah Fitzpatrick. You still have a guy. Obviously, you're trading up, so you're feeling that you want someone who's potentially a little higher valued than what you might get at 20. And just the fact, again, okay, you give up a 3rd round pick this year, 84, that is still a good value, but a 3rd round next year too. This doesn't seem insanely drastic to me. It doesn't seem like, oh my God, like you said, they're selling the farm just to go get whoever they want in this potential position this year. It's logical, it's thought out. And it's something too, it's like, hey, we want X player at this position. We want to move up and be able to find him. This is what we're willing to part with. And again, it does seem really fair in that sense too. I think if this does happen as it's potentially rumored to, I don't don't think you'd see fans, bringing out the pitchforks here.
Certainly not. And I think there is an excitement every year to see, can they go up and get one of those guys?
Yeah.
And there are a few of those guys. Now, I talked a lot about quarterbacks yesterday with Josh Taylor. The idea that if Malik Willis is there, maybe that is what they're doing. But I doubt Malik Willis gets outside the top 10 from what we've heard about teams that want quarterback and who's picking in the top 10. Again, you got the Carolina Panthers at 6, you got the Falcons at 8, and the Seahawks at 9. All those teams could easily pick a quarterback. There's also the Lions at 2 and the Texans at 3, but I think those would be reaches for Willis there for the superstar power that is available in this draft. So then the question then becomes, Jenna, what would be the Steelers' game plan if they trade up to 12? Who could be available at the 12th overall spot? And that also could be what the Steelers may not be locked into trading up at all, but it could be a situation where, hey, if X player falls to 12, we got the ammunition. We've already talked to the Vikings. We're making this move and we're going and getting our guy. The question would be, who would be the player to be worth that kind of a move?
Yeah, no, that is a great question. It just in the sense, because there are a number of guys you could potentially target because of the fact that we know there's some needs the Steelers have to address. And we're still kind of waiting to see potentially what happens if, oh my goodness, I am spacing. If Tyrann Mathieu comes to the Steelers, or if Terrell Edmunds comes back as well, there's those questions there. But if you go into the draft potentially not having a starting safety that you are confident in, and again, they've expressed their confidence in James Pierre, but again, you want that splash player type of guy, or you want a guy that knows your system in Terrell Edmunds. So maybe that's an issue they address too. I think probably with this, my guess would be you'd want to do something line related, offensively, defensively, because there are so many question marks there again too, with Stephon Tuitt's, the question marks surrounding him, the uncertainty surrounding him. Maybe that's an area you look at, because there are a lot of options here. But again, this would have to be some player where they say to themselves, we need this guy. He fell to us. Back to quarterbacks too, because I also just realistically don't see Kenny Pickett or Malik Willis falling to the Steelers, even if they traded up to get to 12.
Right, exactly. And that's the thing, is that if they're trading up to get to 12, I don't see, like, Kenny Pickett's the guy that if he's there at 20, different story. But when you're looking at what would be available to the Steelers, who should they be who they should be getting is part of the question there. Now, I think you brought up a really good point, and you kind of provided the perfect segue to the next part of the next thing we're talking about, of the first of the candidates who I think they would be doing this for, and that does involve the safety position. And it's a guy that a lot of people who didn't think he would be available for the Steelers to get this year, in Kyle Hamilton, the safety out of Notre Dame. We'll talk more about that in just a second here, because I think that there's a legitimate chance that he could fall to that range, and what he would be if the Steelers could be able to get him in this draft class. But first, we got to talk to you guys about betonline.net. Betonline.net, of course, is your number one source for all your betting stats, sports information. That's where you go to find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NBA playoffs, NHL playoffs, and the start of Major League Baseball. Jenna's been out there covering the Pirates, enjoying the nice weather. You can get in on all the baseball action right at betonline.net. That is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to their website today, or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action when you visit BetOnline, where the game starts. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter. She's Jenna Harner. We're talking about the potential trade-up options for the Steelers. And, of course, we're sticking to the 12th overall pick of the idea of who they can get there. Now, Kyle Hamilton, starting with him, there's two other guys I think would be primary go-getters. Well, I'd say even three other guys. But, again, we'll get to them in a sec here. But what Kyle Hamilton could be for the Pittsburgh Steelers, he's a guy who a lot of people have said, Todd McShay of ESPN, the Draft Network with Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino, those guys, a lot of people are saying Kyle Hamilton may be the purest, best player in this draft class with his abilities at Notre Dame at safety. Now, granted, he ran like a 4.59 in his 40-yard dash, not lightning, but he's a guy with incredible length, incredible size at 6'4", 220. He's a guy who's shown he can play the safety position at an elite level. And over his time at Notre Dame, he amassed 8 interceptions, 16 passes broken up, and returned 1 for a touchdown. He's a guy that immediately you place him next to Minkah Fitzpatrick. If you brought in Terrell Edmonds, he's part of that option there. You have that 3 safety look, but Kyle Hamilton will have the potential to be one of those guys who could challenge Minkah Fitzpatrick as a potential best safety in the league, and having an elite pair of safeties could do wonders for the Steelers. I just think the idea of him being one of the guys that they're looking to trade up for, not that crazy, and sounds really nice for what they're trying to do moving forward.
Yeah, again, I mean, that's one of the positions defensively you need to address. You have to figure out, because as we've talked about, this team is seemingly going to have to rely on their defense a lot more, especially this season, but they want to get back to that eliteness that they've had over the last handful of years. And when you have guys already in the room, like Cam Hayward, like TJ Watt, like all of these guys developing that they have, adding a position, adding a guy like Kyle Hamilton. I mean, Mel Kiper literally says that he's exactly what NFL teams want in their first round safeties. A lot of intangibles too. They when they rank these guys, some of the rankings, go from exceptional to above average, average, below average, et cetera, et cetera. And when it comes to his intangibles, his instinct, and his ball skills, he's ranked exceptional in all of those categories. And again, those are kind of things you talk about, intangibles. All of those are intangible in the sense that, sometimes you can't really teach a lot of those things. Ball skills, a little bit, but these are, qualities and traits that you want out of a guy like this. And if you had the chance to go up and get him, if he is there and you can you've laid the groundwork with Minnesota and you can make this happen, this does seem kind of like, I don't entirely want to say no-brainer, but a very, very smart decision that could pay off not only this year, but years down the line for this defense.
Now, here's the crazy part about this. I know some people are saying, well, wait a minute, Chris, why would they do this? They need to trade up to get a quarterback, right? They need a quarterback. Why, what says the Steelers would ever trade up to do that? Like, how would they do this? And I'd say, okay, I hear you, but the Steelers have done this before for an elite safety. That's how they got Troy Polamalu. And it was in a time when they had Tommy Maddox, and the next year they drafted Ben Roethlisberger. It's a lot of parallels right there. I'm not trying to sound crazy, but it's a reality. And if you go back to what they did there, they traded up from, I believe, was the 27th overall pick. They went and they traded that to the Chiefs, and they also gave up the 92nd overall pick and the 200th overall pick of that draft class. So, 92nd, late third there, I believe, if my math is correct. 200, that should be a 4th, 5th or pick around there. Maybe I think a 6th round pick actually might be more accurate. But point being, these are day 3 picks that you lived with then to go get your superstar safety in Troy Polamalu. Now you'd be getting Kyle Hamilton. I know some people out there might be saying, whoa, wait a second, Chris, why would you be paying Minkah Fitzpatrick super money in the way that Steelers are planning to, and then go getting another super safety? Here's the difference. Kyle Hamilton is a guy who's going to be on his rookie contract for the next 5 years.
Yep.
By the time that contract ends, Minkah is going to be 30 years old. And then there's going to be a question, does he want to stick around? Is he still playing at that level? Would he be more affordable then? This would give you an elite safety pair for the next half of a decade throughout the majority of the 2020s. And you're saying you got those two guys and you can build a defense. You already have a defense that you built around that. But Kyle Hamilton, a potential X-factor player next to an X-factor player at safety, could be nightmares for quarterbacks to throw against. And again, the groundwork has been out there for the Steelers that have done this in the past, and it's very possible for the Steelers to do that now. And again, if we're talking about this now, we talked about the picks they gave up for Polamalu, a 3rd round pick this year, a 3rd round pick next year. I think that'd be something that they'd be willing to part with, along with the swapping of the firsts. But there are other guys too, Jenna, and one guy that I've talked about earlier this week, and in fact, when I was doing the Locked On mock draft, that I was able to land. We had an ultimate mock draft where all the hosts in the Locked On Podcast Network made their picks for their teams, and there were also trades that could be involved. I stayed put. I landed Jordan Davis at 20. Mike Tomlin has expressed that the Steelers don't believe he will be there at 20. It worked out in the Locked On mock draft, but he's another guy, like you were talking about, boosting the defensive line. That could be a major play. The Steelers are like, hey, we don't want to take the chance that he falls to 20. We think that he's the next torchbearer of great Steelers defensive linemen to carry the torch whenever Cam Hayward and Stephon Tuitt are done. We want him to be that piece. And this year, he'll be a big piece to stopping the run and making us make sure we have the best defensive line. If that's how the Steelers are thinking, then they may have that be maybe another option to boost their defense with a potential athletic freak type of player.
No, absolutely. And that's kind of the type of guy you want on your defensive line. I just imagine, I look at Cam Hayward and I look at the way he works with some of these younger players and how we see, him kind of taking him under his wing and just, helping him out. And just imagine Jordan Davis, because he's somebody that's been fun to watch. I mean, we knew that whole Georgia defense this year was just absolutely phenomenal. He was such a part of it. And there's been so many great things that have been said about him too, in general, just in terms of the person he is both on and off the field. But when you get a guy like that, especially as young, I just kind of, always when we talk about these guys, that come in on their rookie years, when you have those young first round talents that are just so ready for the NFL and so ready to come in, make an immediate impact in an area the Steelers need an immediate impact too. I mean, the benefits there, obviously looking at safety, obviously Kyle Hamilton would be a fantastic decision if he would fall. But if this guy falls too, if Jordan Davis is there, it's pretty hard to make an argument against going to get him as well, or not going to get him as well.
No, I feel you on that. And again, it's like you said, he'd be able to be groomed by Cam Hayward, not just as a player, but a leader. And I think that's one of the things the Steelers, they have done throughout some of their best eras, is that when they've brought in young guys, they've been able to learn from old guys on how to be the next torchbearers, how to carry things forward. And Cam Hayward is without a doubt a Mr. Steeler, a guy that carries that flag for the Steelers, and having him pass it down. And he may already be in the process of that with Minkah Fitzpatrick, TJ Watt, and anyone else that steps up that's already on the roster. But having another defensive lineman to be part of that would be beneficial as well. Now, there were two other positions that you mentioned at cornerback and the offensive line that I think could also be in play here. One less than the other, and another that could be very realistic and very interesting for what the Steelers are trying to do moving forward. We're going to talk about that in just a second here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, we got to talk to you guys about Built Bar. Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. And if you're trying to eat right, if you're trying to stick to that New Year's resolution, it's April, then it's nice out, you're trying to eat wings, you're trying to be out and enjoy fun and drink and eat all the stuff that's going to break you away from your plan, Built Bar is here to help you avoid doing that, because you're going to actually enjoy eating this protein bar. You haven't tried their new Puffs flavors, they're the best tasting ones because they're fluffy, marshmallowy, and they're the first ever protein infused marshmallows. And they are covered in 100% real chocolate. You can get flavors like cinnamon churro, coconut marshmallow, banana cream pie, all these flavors that are so good. And if you want a regular Built Bar, those are still covered in 100% real chocolate, and they're low in calorie but high in protein. All Built Bars average out to be around 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. You compare that to the average candy bar that has 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. That's a much better option for your health, and it will taste great doing so. And there's several different flavors for you to try out. There's double chocolate, coconut almond, peanut butter brownie, raspberry, cookies and cream, salted caramel, mint brownie, and many more. And in fact, new ones are being released every single month on their website, built.com. So go to built.com, order Built Bars delivered right to your door, and when you do so, be sure to enter the promo code LOCKED15. That's LOCKED15, LOCKED15, and you'll get 15% off your next order of Built Bars when you visit built.com. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter here with Jenna Harner. Now, Jenna, talking about, there was two other positions I thought could really work for the Steelers in a trade up in this situation. Now, again, all this still depends on who falls down. There could be a chance that, like Kyle Hamilton, these two guys I'm talking about, and none of the guys they want to trade up for, they're all gone by 12, and they're like, you know what? No need. We're going to wait for 20, and we'll see what happens. Yeah. But I do think that cornerback is very important to the Pittsburgh Steelers' future. I think that they've signed some solid veterans in Ahkello Witherspoon, Levi Wallace. They have Cam Sutton. Those are all good CB2 type of guys that you can see, hey, I'd like that person lined up next to my star cornerback, but they don't have a true star cornerback. They don't have a guy that's like, hey, you circle this guy on because he's an X factor at the cornerback position. And this year has some interesting chances. The top 4 cornerbacks, as I've talked about a lot in this show, Ahmad Sauce Gardner, Derek Stingley Jr., Trent McDuffie, Andrew Booth Jr. All 4 of those guys, I feel like if the Steelers got one of those guys in the first round, they'd be set. But getting one of the top 2 guys could be interesting. And in the ultimate locked on mock draft that we did, when I was looking back at it and I saw what fell down to the Vikings at 12. Now, fair enough to say that the Kyle Hamilton thing wouldn't work. Washington took Kyle Hamilton at 11. So in that alternate universe, he would be off the table. But who wasn't off the table was Derek Stingley. And Derek Stingley's an interesting prospect because he tested really well in his pro day. He had an excellent 2019 season that every people said when he was a freshman, yeah, when that guy comes out, he's going to be a problem. But he sat out 2020, had a so-so 2021 that wasn't the same elite year, and now people are like, maybe not top 10, we don't know, and his stock has dropped a bit. It hasn't dropped enough to make him the 20th overall pick in my mind, but he's another guy that if you add if he comes out and he is an X factor cornerback and you get that CB1, that's another thing I think the Steelers would be happy to trade for.
Oh, absolutely. Because again, look at the quarterbacks you're going to be going against, not only in the AFC, but just your division alone. I mean, in theory, you're facing Lamar Jackson, Deshaun Watson, and Joe Burrow twice a year. You need elite cornerbacks to be able to compete for the division and to be able to give yourself chances to make the playoffs and continue to move forward, especially again, knowing what a lot of people anticipate this offense to be this season, just with the uncertainty there's going to be there. So if you can go get a guy like Derek Stingley Jr., again, you're just boosting your defense. I feel like we kind of keep coming back to that only because that's something that this team needs to do. There's no doubt about that. And yeah, with Stingley a little bit too, I know his injuries have been a little bit of a concern in terms of his durability, things along those lines, but he is called the most physically gifted cornerback in this entire class. I mean, just his physical attributes are insane. When you look at cornerback specific traits as well, his cover skills, his ball skills, and his height, weight, and speed. I mean, he is so intriguing to watch when he is healthy. To me, also, again, I feel like we keep being like, oh yeah, this seems like it's a great decision. But again, if these guys are there, and if you are Art Rooney II, Kevin Colbert, Mike Tomlin in that room on draft day, and they're there, I think there's going to be a lot of potential. Yeah, I think we may need to do this type of thing just because they want to set themselves up for the best chance to be able to not only compete in the division, but compete for a Super Bowl.
I think all those things you said, there were great points about Stingley's profile being an athletic superstar type of talent and a guy that people can want. One intangible, it's not something that you put on paper that you put on a stat sheet or anything like that. But one intangible that I know that it matters to Mike Tomlin and to the Pittsburgh Steelers is lineage. When you have people in your family that've been through the NFL, they tend to appreciate that because you have someone who's given you better insight into what it takes not only to make it to the NFL, but stay in the NFL. Derek Stingley Jr., of course, the son of Derek Stingley. He was a former defensive back. Had his career ended on a very tragic note, but he was a guy who knew what the NFL was like. So that being said, there's a lot of things that would circle around Derek Stingley at 12. But I do want to open up my mind to other possibilities other than just the defense. And if we look on offense, now certainly wide receiver could be a factor there. They could look at Chris Olave. They could look at Jamison Williams if they think his ACL is going to be repaired for the season and things like that. Like those kind of guys would be in play. But everyone's done. We've talked a lot about offensive tackle early in the offseason, but then the free agency period said, oh, well, they brought back Chukwuma Okorafor. They signed James Daniels. They signed Mason Cole. They're not looking at the offensive line. Hold on a second. What if they were with this 12th pick and we just fell for the okie doke? Now, this isn't something that I'm saying is likely. I'm pointing that out here now. We are not saying this is going to happen. But in the other scenario where one of these top offensive linemen fell to the Steelers, what if it did? And that's what I'm looking at here. Now, of course, center and guard, more prospects that would be fitting for the 20th overall pick, or even later in the first round. Not the positions I would be going for at the 12th overall position, just with this year's class. But 3 guys at the offensive tackle position who I think would be worthy of that pick are guys that are most likely going to be gone, will be gone before 20. Of course, up there, Evan Neal, Alabama offensive tackle. Some people say he's the best offensive tackle in the class. There's Ikem Ekwonu of an NC State, another the freakish athlete of the bunch who also looks like a superstar offensive tackle, and another guy in Charles Cross, who also is a potential guy. He's a Mississippi State dude, measures out well, tests well. Those are the 3 guys that could go top 10. But if one of them didn't, and there's a lot of flipping and flopping, Jenna, when I see mock drafts of who goes first. Evan Neal goes first. Ekwonu goes first. I've seen Charles Cross go first. But sometimes one of those 3 will fall out of the top 10 in these mock drafts because there's so many other talents. There's someone that wants to get a Malik Willis. Someone wants to get, there's Kayvon Thibodeau, and there's Sauce Gardner and Aiden Hutchinson and Trayvon Walker, and all these guys eventually add up to the chance that you could get a bigger, one of those guys there. And so if you're sitting there at 12 and an offensive tackle is there for you to pick, it could be an option. And in the Locked On mock draft, the Steelers, the Vikings at 12th overall were passed on Charles Cross, who fell down to the Ravens at 14. The Steelers typically are not. If you look at the Steelers' history, and I say this all the time about the tackle position, they have great centers. They have great guards, great running backs, wide receivers, quarterbacks, defensive tackles, defensive ends, linebackers, safeties, cornerback, all those other positions, even tight ends. The one position where you see that they're kind of not as elite at throughout their history is offensive tackle. And Jenna, I really think that if they're saying, you know what? Let's change up the narrative here. We get a chance at one of these guys. There's a possibility for that. Now, again, battling that with defensive playmakers in what they're trying to be in the coming years, that's something. But Jenna, what would you say if the Steelers were able to get one of those top supreme offensive tackles as a stud for their offensive line?
I mean, that, again, no brainer in that way, just because of what you're going to have to do. We know how much of a problem the offensive line has been for the last couple seasons, especially as highlighted as it was a year ago. You know that your future is in Najee Harris and the running game, especially this season. You're going to look to lean on it. So if one of these elite guys is there that is angry and, intense and, that mean, nasty type of, in your face type of player on the offensive line, you're building towards the future. We know that especially this year, the quarterback situation is a giant question mark. And there's so many, is this going to happen? Is this going to happen? Is Trubisky going to be the answer? Is it going to be Mason? Are they just going to say, we're going to ride Trubisky and then get a guy next year? All these types of questions that are there. You can kind of put to rest some of those questions if you go get one of these guys that will really shore up your offensive line. I mean, just looking at Evan Neal and himself too, anytime you look at a guy on Alabama and those offensive lines, I mean, we heard Najee Harris talk about the guys he played in front of year in, year out. Most of those guys get drafted. That's just how elite that team, those offensive lines are year in, year out. But then again, if any of these guys are there, these, not that they're hard to come by in that type of sense, but you protecting your quarterback is one of the most important jobs in all of football. So if you can get a guy that can help you do that, especially that can help you protect your quarterback and help you establish more of a run game than you had a season ago and get your star running back going, that just seems to me one of those options. Again, like if one of them is there, if they fall out of the top 10, because again, there have been surprises, aka Daniel Jones, when the Giants took him as early as they did. They're shuffling. Things along those lines tend to happen. So if there's a surprise pick earlier on and a couple of these guys, one of these guys even falls to that position, then that's definitely something I have no doubt that Mike Tomlin, that Kevin Colbert, Art Rooney II, they would all consider heavily.
It's something that would be interesting to have. And again, one thing to think about too, when the Steelers made their last group of offensive linemen for the 2010 decade, they did so with anchor players. Marquise Pouncey was an anchor player. He was a guy that everyone could balance off of his eliteness, off of his top tier talent. The same thing goes for David DeCastro. Marcus Gilbert, though a second round pick, was another guy like that for several years for them before he moved on.
Yeah.
Those were the guys that made it easier for the Alejandro Villanuevas, the Ramon Fosters, the guys who they were undrafted, they weren't highly heralded, but they came in, they earned their spots, and playing off of those anchor players, they were able to be better because of it. The Steelers haven't had that anchor guy. Now, maybe James Daniels will be one of those anchor guys. Maybe Kevin Dotson will become one of those guys. Maybe Kendrick Green will become one of those guys. Who knows? But if you get a guy like this at offensive tackle, a top-tier offensive tackle, you're drafting him to be one of those anchor guys. And we know, on top of protecting your quarterback, they know that the future of the Steelers, at least for the next 4 or 5 years, is going to be running the football with Najee Harris. So why not add to the offensive line with a guy? And if you're sitting there saying, well, what about Dan Moore Jr.? I'll be like, what about him? Dan Moore Jr. is a 4th-round pick. You're going to pass up on a potential 1st-round star at a position that could really help you for a long time for a 4th-round pick that you can also say, hey, man, Dan, we love you, but try over at right tackle, battle with Chooks. We'll see how that goes. And then you're in a position where if Dan Moore Jr. is good enough and this kid, whoever is Charles Cross, Aquanu, Neal, whoever you draft with this 12th overall pick that we're hypothetically, proposing here, you were in this position where we got 2 guys on the rookie contracts. We don't need to pay Chukuma Core for in those big deals. And you say, hey, either reduce your deal or we work something else out.
Yeah.
It's another position to add flexibility here. And again, I am not saying it's likely. I still think it was a much higher chance for it to be a Derek Stingley, a Jordan Davis, a Kyle Hamilton boosting the defense. But throwing this possibility out there, I think Jenna puts another little nugget into what the Steelers could do if they were to be aggressive and make such a draft day move.
Yeah, no, definitely. It gives them a whole lot of options. And I think it is kind of fun to sit here and imagine, but it's one of those, more realistic possibilities. It doesn't feel completely out of the realm. We're not talking about them trading up for, the 4th pick type thing. This is something that is seemingly realistic, especially with what they would potentially be giving up to go get whoever they could go up and get.
Absolutely. Jenna, we will see if this trade does happen and who they will go up with in less than 2 weeks. The draft starts on the 28th of April. So less than 2 weeks, we'll actually know. The speculations are gone. We only got 2 more mock draft Mondays for y'all to win and see if y'all can get y'all picks up on here. So if you want to, if you're new to the show and you're just getting used to things, you're like, what's mock draft Monday? It's the day where on Monday I pick one person. We have a bunch of people that submit their mock drafts on our Locked On Steelers Facebook page. Look for the post that I make on Fridays where you can post all throughout the weekend all your mock drafts and your explanations for your picks. Also, you can tweet at me at Carter Critiques on Twitter if you want to get your picks considered. I take those picks, I evaluate them, and then whatever works best with the show next week on Monday, I bring them up and we get you a shout out in the show. So do submit your mock draft Monday picks in. We only got 2 more mock draft Mondays to do. So you want to make sure that you're on that list. Jenna, thanks so much for joining me here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. It's always great to have you here. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Chris, it is always a pleasure to be here. I say it every week, but it is truly one of my favorite parts of Fridays. I always love being on this show and chatting with you and having some fun, as we always do. You can find me on Twitter at Jenna Harner11, Instagram, Jenna_Harner. In WPXI channel 11. We are getting ready for the draft as well, sprinkling in some Penguins regular season, Pirates start of the season, whole lot ahead. Can't wait.
It's a lot that's going on in sports. It's a great time. So do check out all the great stuff they do at Channel 11. Sometimes your boy's over there on the final word too. You never know.
Yeah.
But absolutely. Thanks again, Jenna, for joining the Locked On Steelers podcast. Thank you, dear listeners and viewers, for checking out the Locked On Steelers podcast. If you watched us on YouTube or anywhere else, you can find us on YouTube or Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, anywhere. Like this video if you saw it on YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get all of our Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our breaking news updates when we release them. If you want to help out the show even further, go on Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star review with a positive comment. You both at the same time, and you get a special shout out at the end of the show, like this person whose name is HFHUFU. So Hafufu, I believe that's the name. I apologize if I messed it up, but you left a 5-star review that was very nice. The best podcast ever as a Steelers fan in New York, and don't have cable, so I get good news, and God bless Big Ben. Thank you for your 5-star review. Appreciate you, and appreciate everyone who leaves their 5-star reviews on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Remember, you can get your shout out as well. Thanks again for Jenna for joining us. We'll be back on your screens and in your ears on Monday, talking more about the Pittsburgh Steelers. Maybe there's been some more moves. We'll keep you up to date with that. But until then, have a great weekend. We'll be back on your screens and in your ears very soon.